Hey, brothers, I am excited. Man, the past 2 weeks, I've been excited about this show. But, guys, before we talk, show what we're smoking, and talk a little bit about us, about the show, let me welcome Ceci Escano. She came on probably 15 minutes before we went on live. Thank you, sister. I believe all the way from Riverside. Thank you for being on. We got Big Juarez all the way from Long Beach, who's working right now. And we got the San Diego PD legend, man. He's 97. Let's go, Team 4. Our good old brother Chris Kilby, and all the way from Nebraska, we got Matilde Serna, está presente y lista para darle duro. Welcome, sister, correctional officer, I believe a correctional captain or lieutenant with the Department of Correction, Nebraska. We love you, sister. Thank you for being on. And all the way from Thailand, we got our famous, the Batman, Bill DeGenis. And Ceci's here is asking how the weather is. He says very hot and sunny. And we also have Chill Reacts, Bienvenido, and who else? 209er. We got 209er on. What's up, fellas? And we got our brother, man, all the way from Arizona, Jerónimo de los Cielos. Guys, I am excited. How do you guys feel today, man?
I think it's going to be a great show today. It's going to be eye-opening.
Yes, very excited about this show. Been looking forward to it and ready to get started.
Well, you know what? Let's start off. First of all, what are we drinking? Let's start off with you, Doug. What are you drinking tonight?
Tonight, I've got a Highland single malt in a port cask, 14-year, and I'm going to butcher the name. It's Glenmorangie, but it's a very nice Highland Scotch. Very
Dude,
nice.
that is really peaty. That is, man. That is, you know who loves that? Caesar Solis. Caesar, that's his favorite drink. Yes.
Next time I see him, we're gonna have to meet because I like that smoky peaties. I love those.
That's right. That is awesome. Bobby, what are you drinking and smoking tonight, brother?
I'm having the good old dependable Lalo, the tequila. The Lalo, and right here, ready to start. And my cigar, I'm drinking an Espinosa, the L'Orange Oscuro, the Oscuro. It's a strong cigar. I love these bold, stout cigars, and I had a sandwich to eat before, so I'm ready to go and love the smoke here. So that's what I'm having, a tequila. I don't ever come on without also having some coffee. Always have coffee.
Good for you, brother. Hey, you know what? That orange from Espinosa, great cigar. I bought a box when I was living in Fort Lauderdale. I actually met a family at a cigar event. Great family from Miami. Oh, right. Great cigar. Well, today, I'm believe it or not, I'm smoking one of the original cigars that when I started smoking back in 1994. It's called El Rey del Mundo, and I just found them on Mike's Cigars a couple of weeks, well, probably a couple of months ago, and I bought 3 boxes. They're not expensive. It's a great cigar, and it brought me back to 94, man. The first time I tried a cigar, I had smoked this in 20 years. And so I bought me 3 boxes. I'm set. And because of our guest, who's a personal friend of ours, I'm drinking. I took out my best scotch that my son-in-law gave me for my birthday. It's Apple Lure. It's a Speyside single malt scotch, all the way from Scotland. It's a great scotch. Highly recommended. But guys, before we get started, let me tell you briefly. I was at that conference last week in Campbell, and especially, all 3 of us, we know that people are always saying, this new generation of cops. We're doomed because of this new generation of cops. I'm here to tell you guys that, you know what? I met some damn great cops in Campbell. And you know what? I think that they said the same thing when we came on. Right, Doug?
They absolutely said that it was a lost cause when we came on. All the old timers back then were like, "Oh, I can't believe they hired guys like you."
Yeah, right, Bobby? Right, you heard that, right?
Every generation says the same thing.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things, like us, we say, I feel bad for the generation of cops that are working right now because they don't have it as good as we had it. Well, they will never know because they never had it that way, so they'll have it as good as they can have it today, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I met, guys, some great cops. We're in good hands. We're also talking about gang cops, Doug, and we're talking about gang and narc cops. they're special. They're gunslingers. You know what I mean? So I'll tell you, I was at home. You guys would have been both at home there because I was among great gunslingers, man. Go ahead, Doug.
I was going to say it's a special breed.
It is.
That does that kind of stuff. You got to be dedicated. And you know what? There are those guys that get into those units and decide, this isn't for me. And it's God bless them for like realizing that this isn't their cup of tea, and they get out.
Yeah.
But it takes a special group of people to do that kind of work.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
But good hands, guys. This new generation, they weren't far behind, or they might even be a little ahead of us. But you know what? They're our brothers and sisters. Prayer for them. I was reading somewhere, I believe it's 171, maybe I'm off, officers shot this year so far. I mean, our officers are getting shot daily, but our prayers for them and their families. But guys, this isn't about us. This is about our guest. Bobby, you ready to introduce our guest?
Yes, I am.
Okay, before we do, let me just show a quick video and then it's all yours, brother. I am excited about our guest today. All right, here we go.
I feel like every drug dealer's dream is to have a zoo. So of course our husbands had a zoo. They had the tigers. We had flamingos running around. That right there is putting a stamp on that you made it in the drug world.
Here we go, Bobby. It's all yours, brother.
All right. Well, to start off, I want to welcome everybody that's joining us. I think I have a lot of friends that are going to be watching after the fact. They're probably going to be watching later on or tonight or tomorrow. But I want to introduce our guest. I feel very honored to have our guest as a narcotics gang cop, especially those of us who have interest in doing the drug investigations, gang investigations. This is something that most of us would probably want to hear. And our guest was a kingpin. Started out as a kid in Chicago, born and raised in Chicago, spent a lot of time in Mexico, got into the drug business kind of by accident. I've talked to him about his story, and became a kingpin, was moving massive amounts of cocaine through Chicago for various groups from Sinaloa, some of the big names that you hear about down in Mexico. You hear Chapo, you hear Mayo, you hear those type of names. But we're not here to glorify that lifestyle. I think our main message is going to be how our guest came from a very dark world, from the darkest of dark. And a lot of us that were investigators saw that world from the other side. And he has come out on the other end, and come out to the other end mainly driven by his faith in our Savior. And he has an incredible story to tell. Like I said, I'm very honored to have our guest, Margarito Jay Flores. If you've watched or followed any of the cartel coverage that came out with the capture and subsequent court trial of Chapo Guzman and some of the other operatives that were running distribution of cocaine and other drugs to our country, Jay was at ground zero. And I think he has, like I said, it's a dark story, but also a very positive story. I believe it's very positive in the story of redemption. So once again, I want to thank Jay for joining us and accepting our invitation. I want to introduce Margarito Jay Flores as our guest. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me, guys. Dave, Doug, Bobby, I appreciate it. It's an honor for me to be here. Just hearing your words, coming from someone like you with your histories, with all your backgrounds in law enforcement, and to hear those words, it's almost like I can't believe it. It's a little surreal. But it's a pleasure for me to be here and an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, let me jump in real quick, just for our viewers, so that they know there's nothing wrong with Jay's camera, but obviously because of the life he led, and later coming to our side, to the good side, there's obviously some people out there that would want to do him and his family harm. So he's gonna, for the duration of this interview, he's gonna cover his face, and we totally respect that. We would do the same thing. So just to want to let our audience know that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that as well. I'm not that much of a pretty face to look at anyway, guys. So
I think me, Dave, and Doug also have faces made for radio.
yeah. But the only advantage I had with this group is that it made me look young.
Yes.
Before we get started, I just want to thank you for real once again for having me, and I want to just say hello to Steve Duncan, who I know is
Yes.
watching, and give him my appreciation. And thank you for all his support. Great guy. And also for John Humphreys, who actually introduced us. Bobby,
Yes.
hopefully he's watching. He's been a mentor. He's actually been helping me in my walk with Christ. And he's an amazing person. I'm just so fortunate to have met them, and maybe my brother's watching as well. So I'll send him a hello. If he is listening and tuning in, as well as one special request to Matilda. Saludos to her, and she's out in Nebraska, and I do know a lot of her family members. Hopefully, I send my regards and thank her for tuning in.
Wow, that's a small world. I just saw her at this conference last week. She is a very special person. That's beautiful.
But that's great to hear. That's great to hear. There's a lot of backstory to that, and I hope that her family's all doing well.
Hey, AJ, before Bobby asks you the next question, you're absolutely right. Steve Duncan has been on our show and he's coming on. He doesn't know yet in a couple of weeks, but he just found out. But it's an honor, bro, to have him on. And I like what he said. Good luck, kid. That's Steve Duncan. You know what I mean? I mean, what an awesome and a legend within himself also. Bobby, it's all yours, brother.
Well, I'm going to start out, Jay. The basic question we ask everybody that comes on our podcast, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where did you start? Where does your journey start? Give us our audience a little bit a history lesson of your journey in life.
I guess it starts off with me owning a zoo, huh?
Yes, that's why I'm going to Abu Dhabi, because I want to make enough money to open my own zoo.
Well, you're gonna make enough money to own a couple of zoos if you keep you stay with us. I wish I was with you, Bobby.
Yes.
Sure. You know what? I was prepared for this, and I was waiting for you guys to ask me what I was gonna be drinking. And I was prepared.
Let's see it. NyQuil. NyQuil. Well, hey,
I'm gonna tell you, I'm under the weather. I've been fighting this cold for quite some time. It's COVID, but I'm still here. I couldn't let this opportunity pass me up. That was just a little side joke because I'm not a drinker like that. And when I do drink, it's if I drink one drink, that's my limit there, or past my limit probably. So I think it's great that you guys share a drink or a cigar and stuff. My brother's actually a cigar smoker as well.
Before you hit on your NyQuil story, I don't know if Doug did this, but Doug, when you were in Afghanistan, I was in Iraq. There's no alcohol, and I was in Iraq for New Year's Eve, 2 years. And since there was no alcohol, one of the guys from Florida came over with a bottle of NyQuil, some other sleep medicine, and a Red Bull and a Dr. Pepper. And he said, if you mix it, it tastes like a Long Island iced tea. So we did a shot of cough syrup with Dr. Pepper and Coke at midnight.
Oh my gosh! Well, I wish I could say we didn't have alcohol in Afghanistan, but I'd be lying to you.
Yeah, but we didn't have it.
We managed to find it.
Yeah.
The British people are good for it.
I'll take your word for it. But while we're at it, I just want to thank all of you guys for your service, especially those who serve the country. Just acknowledgement. You guys are survivors on both ends, right? I know some of your history, so you guys been through a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
All right, tell us a little bit about yourself, Jay.
Well, I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, in South Side, in a neighborhood called Little Village. For many who don't come from Chicago or that area, it's basically known as the Mexico of or the Little Mexico of the Midwest. I was born into a family of drug traffickers. I have a twin brother named Peter, and me and my brother were basically we're gonna be bred to become these drug traffickers through my father. My father was in prison when I was born. He didn't come out of prison till the age of 7, a little bit around that age. He was in prison for selling 11 pounds of black heroin to undercover agent, and received a 10-year sentence. This was 80, 81. Um, so I was raised by a very strong Mexican uh, mother, who was way younger than my father. They immigrated from Mexico. My father in the 50s, and my mom came later. I have 3 sisters, and there was four of us, right? 4 boys. Um, and it's me, my twin brother, and my older brother who since has passed away, and my brother who's still alive now, who are going to kind of play a big part in my life, as a drug trafficker. Um, at a young age, since I was 8 years old, my father didn't like, you know, I guess being poor, right? He was totally against poverty, I guess, because of the way he grew up, and um, he was drug trafficker. I guess he found that a way of being able to make money, and prior to that, he was a coyote. And it didn't take long for him to come home and just see the house in shambles. Right, we were living off of government aid. Um, the house was falling apart, and it really, that really got to him. And it didn't take long before he decided to go back into what he knew. Right, how the way he knew how to actually take us out of poverty, which was going to be drug trafficking. Um, when he came home, my older brothers by then, who are 15, 13 years my senior, where had become Latin kings at that age. Even at a younger age, they were had joined a street gang. And my mom, being ignorant to it, had no idea what a gang was. Right, she thought it was just the culture, and that's what kids did at that time. But my father, being imprisoned, with these gang members, um, he knew exactly what it stood for. And it didn't take long, soon after he got home, where he kicked my older brothers out the house for being in a gang. And basically he called them bums. And they would have their meetings and parties at the house, and he wasn't gonna stand for that, and he kicked them out. And that's gonna kind of lead them in a way of having to become men, right? From being these younger boys to um, who were like living at home, to having to go out there and provide. Um, so it was a combination of things. But uh, soon after he came home, he had an issue with the way me and my brother were being raised. I guess being raised, in Mexican. He's Mexican machismo type. He wants his boys to be men. I think for him, being raised by my mom and my sisters. I have an older sister who's 20 years, my senior. He felt like we were being raised too soft, right? Um, and I think that kind of, really, like, he disliked it, and he wanted that to change. So he basically, took us under his wing, like, I'm gonna teach you how to be a man. And I think through, just not understanding what he was going to be teaching us, um, he ended up started teaching us the drug trade. Not long after he came home, we made our first trip to Mexico. What we thought was gonna be a family vacation in a Ford Temple, and that was gonna be our first, introduction to drug trafficking. And not long after we were in Mexico, we he took us out to the mountains, and basically he started to teaching us, what marijuana was, and how marijuana was gonna, take us, out of take the hunger away from us. He would always say that, nos va a quitar la hambre, right? Like, um, and we basically started, at that point, learning everything about the, marijuana business and drug trafficking, from the cultivation to, harvesting, and um, the, how to smuggle it. At that time it was gas tanks. Um, we would compress the marijuana in the fields, and from there, yeah, I remember just remember those times where Mexican marijuana, you could get like a 50, 60 pound brick that was like this small. We compress it with um, hydraulic jacks, and then conceal them in compartments, well, in the gas tank at that time, and and drive it across the border. I always share this story about, the first time, we took that trip on the way back. It was just me, my brother, and my parents. Um, at the checkpoint, I always say this is the first time I'm actually going to be interrogated by a federal officer. Uh, my father had forgot to bring our birth certificates, and that led them to, pull us over for a second inspection. And basically, they interviewed us. They want to make sure that our parents were not, smugglers across or stealing us. Basically, we went in there for like half an hour, and they just, asked questions about our background and stuff like that. But they had never even guessed, that we were smuggling, over, 200 pounds of marijuana at that time. I also believe just because we were twins at that time, there was not that many twins, right? That identical twins at that. We were still rare, so every time they seen us in the street, it was like always, people stare, ask questions, and we were unique. So we were unique to the border patrol agents as well. And that was one of the first times I see my father actually get nervous, and basically that was gonna be the first of many trips to Mexico for my brother and I with my father. And again, it was it didn't stop there. Once we took that road back to Chicago, it continued where we would be responsible for unloading the drugs, from the gas tanks or the compartments, and then our job was to separate the marijuana. And we learned how to use a triple beam scale, by the age of 8, 9,
Wow.
And then we would.
AJ, I have a quick question, real quick. Back then, there was no really cartels. It was more families. Was it a certain family that you were working with at the time? Was it Sinaloa? Was it Michoacan? Who were you working with at the time before they were the cartels, the families? Do you remember who the family was by any chance?
So make it clear, my father, right, was working, but I guess that's a good question. But yes, it was the Flores family.
Oh,
um,
really? Okay, they were
meaning,
uncles that were
meaning,
dealing.
no, it was my
Yeah.
father. I feel like, at that time, even from our region, like my father was considered to be that family in our region,
Really? Wow.
hands down. I started to share the story that as a kid, the town I come from, has 30, 40,000 people. It seems smaller, but everywhere we went, it's always about your last name, who you are. And so many people knew my father and would come up to us and be like, and see my father and just greet him with this happiness. And uh, my father at an early age made sure that every time we met a friend of his, that we always greeted him, shook his hand, looked him in the eye, and treated them with respect. And I would hear all these stories about my father, like changing so many, people's lives because he took them to the United States as a coyote, and he wouldn't charge them. And that changed their life. That was going to change their generation, right after generation, because it gave them opportunity that they didn't have before. We're talking about in the 50s, 60s. I remember me and my brother later on talking and saying that my father would take the credit, but what they didn't know is that he was smuggling back, marijuana or black tar heroin. So, his excuse was that he was taking back, migrant workers to work in farms in California and in Texas. It was like a all, around business for him, win for him, where he was able to use them as cover loads, because at that time, still, American farms needed workers, and they were like, kind of welcome, with open arms, So uh, it was a win-win for him. And my father was considered to be one of the, like, probably wealthiest persons in his time in those regions. The first one to have a car, and he always wore, suits and stuff. Just, he was probably a smarter businessman than most around those areas. So when you ask about what family, it's like, it was the Flores family.
The Flores family. That's
Basically, that's the
interesting.
family. My father being that I guess, the originator at that time. Now you hear other stories about, I know my dad's involvement or relationship with like the Herreras, and I hear about those stories, especially being from Chicago and stuff like that, because there were big, heroin dealers from Durango and stuff like that. But nah, as a kid, not that I recall, it was always, just my father's and his own drug trafficking organization.
AJ, one quick question about your father. What was his grade? I mean, did he go to third grade, sixth grade, secundaria, primaria? What was his education? Do you know by any chance?
I don't think he made it past the third grade. I don't think he made it past the third grade. You imagine, he's growing up in the 40s, in the 30s, right? I mean, my dad was like, I want to say he was 42 when he had my brother and I, when me and my brother were born. So he already had lived quite a life. But I would have never, you would have never known, when it comes to education, because of his intelligence.
Yeah.
He learned English. It's been being in prison. He just knew the highways. And he, when we were younger, it wasn't always about drug trafficking. He was teaching us the interstates and just common sense things that we're going to actually put to use later on in our life, in our world, like interstates. What states were known for. He was just like he lived he already had lived enough to know so much. He was experienced, and he knew English, and he loved math, and I guess he was self-taught in many ways.
Yeah.
And he started kind of sharing that with us, and before we could even go out and run the streets, it was like, give me your multiplication tables, stuff like that. And I for sure very intelligent, and if anything, I don't think I ever gave him the credit, but yeah, for sure, maybe if I have any intelligence, it comes from him.
Well, you guys, I have a question here, Jay. Where in Mexico were you guys from? I believe
you
guys were from Zacatecas.
Yes, sir. We're from Zacatecas.
Okay.
Central Mexico. And yeah, I guess that was my childhood. From the time I was 8 to the time I was like 12, 13, and it didn't take long. When my father came back, on our first run, he made a $3,000 investment, to buy, whatever the 100 kilos, which comes back to 220 pounds. At that time, I think the wholesale was like $600, for Mexican marijuana in the street. So you do the math. It was like life changing for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
At that time, in the 80s, especially in the late 80s, when we're talking about recession, and it certainly changed our life. And what I've started to pick up since, going back to my life, is that when it came to the customer base, he didn't have to go far. His customer base was at home, and his sons, you know what I mean, with his older sons. By then they had joined, they were, already, basically, higher ranking members in the Lion King Street Gang, and at that time in Chicago, the Lion Kings were considered probably the more dominant, the more organized, and I guess responsible gang. So it kind of, it was a simple, connection there through my brothers.
So Jay, I have a question about that. You'd said earlier that your father it sounded like he was disappointed that his older sons had gotten into the gang while he was still in prison. When he got out, he booted them out and told them they were knuckleheads. But towards the end, because of the drug trafficking, he kind of accepted the fact that they were involved in that group of people that could help his organization.
So I'm gonna take my wife's. This is, I'm gonna take her words. She always says this, is that my father was a big, basically a big contradiction.
Okay.
He didn't have a problem with his sons being drug traffickers. He had a problem with his sons being bums.
Got
it. And he understood, and let's be honest, and I kind of, it's part of some of the stuff I share today, that most gang members are not money makers. You guys know this, with your background, Dave. They're gang members. and or those gang members would be like drug addicts, or whatever they are. They're just not considered to be gang members. And to my father, it's like he would say, you could be whatever you want. He said you could be a killer, you know, a drug trafficker, but the only thing he would say is that you're not gonna be a thief, you're not gonna be a homosexual, and not in those words, and you're not gonna be a rat. You know, but he despised gang members because we grew up in a little village. It was like gang infested. He seen all these gang members. He was with them in prison. There's for sure there was gang members that he liked or respected, and maybe that were like making that transition between being like boys into men, and starting to realize that life. But he didn't have a problem with his sons being drug traffickers.
Yeah.
He also one of the things he disliked was what his son spent the money on that they made out of drug trafficking. So he just he didn't like it.
Hey Jay, can you give us an example of like what he expected for you as a young man, already 12 years old, you and your twin brother, how and what to spend your money on? Because by now you're making good money, right?
Oh no way! Don't forget. I'm just working from. I'm not working for my dad. My dad, just to give you a glimpse. I remember while we were doing all this, and my life had changed. Like our job, we had many jobs. We had to count the money. Plus, we had to keep up like a kid, go to school. Clean the yard, cut the grass. And I could be like, "Hey, Dad, can I get $1?" He'd be like, "For what?" No, in all honesty. But what he did teach us was the importance of like, what it was to pay the bills, to keep food in the table, to make sure that the house was well maintained and kept up, all those necessities, and made sure like he would buy us everything we needed for school, or like clothes and stuff like that. But anything else, it was like you don't need it.
Yeah.
At the same time, my older brother by then had kind of started to transition from his drug was cocaine, and he had started basically had become a kingpin in the neighborhood, and his money was a little bit different. Even though my father was he'd make a lot of money, my older brothers, you could see his wealth, right? We're talking about the 80s and stuff, early 90s. And my brother would show up, my older brother Armando would show up and give me and my brother $50 or $100 each, every time he saw us. And back then it was like that was a lot of money, right? We're 10, 11 years old, and he'd giving us this money. And so for the most part, me and my brother wouldn't even ask my father for money. But it was his drug trafficking organization. I wasn't involved. In 92, he was arrested for selling a kilo of cocaine to an undercover. And he made bail and went on the run to Mexico and took us with him. And he sold our childhood home to our older brother at that time, who now could afford it. And me and my brother basically moved to Mexico full time, where he put us in school and stuff. And that was a big life, it was a big difference, of culture for us, and a big change. That even though I felt like we had friends in Mexico, we had a second home there, it was a big difference for us to actually be living there. And
How old were you at the time, Jay? How old were you and your twin brother?
I want to say I was it was from 11 to 12, 11 to 12 years old. Yeah, they took us out of school and put us in school in Mexico. And me and my brother were like basically depressed, right? We were born and raised in Chicago, and our friends were there, and we went to school there. So we made the best of it. Like I loved being in Mexico. It was like my second home. I love the culture. I love the people there. I had made friends, and even when we were there, he was still kind of like wanted to teach us hard work. So he had a chicken farm where he'd make us go work in the chicken farm. And they really basically like made sure that we kind of suffered, right? That he wanted to show us what hard work was, and so anything that involved hard work that he was doing, he would make sure that we participated. So it was like a lot of life lessons as well. But you know what, my father, there's a lot of things like, he never smoked, he never did drugs, he didn't drink. So I think in turn, that's me and my brother actually never drank alcohol, never smoked cigarettes or cigars, or I know my brother started as recently, but we never actually did drugs either. Um, so there's a lot of like things I did take on that I feel like taught me how to be a man. And I I don't believe that if he would not taught me the principles about respect, right? Respecting your everyone and your elders, and how to treat people, and how to speak to people. All these little things that are I feel like are what made me and my brother successful later on. It's not gonna be, always the connections, or it's gonna be those simple principles that I think that we all want to teach our kids. That later on actually end up helping me and my brother in the drug trade.
Hey Jay, you mentioned before in the past when we talked, you've talked about your dad always saying, "Don't drink, don't smoke, and be faithful to your wife." I mean, he taught you some really great life principles, but yet he was poisoning America,
Yeah.
poisoning the world. But it just shows how disciplined he was, and that's why he was successful, because he never touched what he sold. Correct? And you and your brother learned that at a very young age.
But Dave, I'm gonna correct you there. Like, one thing about me sharing my story, I'm when I do share my story, I don't hold back on truths, right? The good and the
Yeah.
bad. Um, and me sharing this backstory, I think there's gonna come a lot of times where I'm gonna say some things. I'm not glorifying it, but this would be a
No,
good
we
example.
understand that. Yes.
My father, I don't know about him being a good drug trafficker, and we argued about that many times later. Um,
Mhm.
but one thing he didn't believe in being faithful to a woman. He believed in having as many women as you could afford, and that's where you're gonna
Oh,
start
okay.
seeing the
Mhm.
basically the differences between who me and my brother actually are as men
Mhm.
today and who he was. I learned that I learned early on. I think that maybe I didn't recognize it, but you know through the years I started to understand that everyone's giving you all types of different gifts. I could learn a lot from my father, right? But the things
Mhm.
I didn't like, because I see my mom suffer. My dad had multiple families, you know,
Mhm.
um, and seeing what my dad actually like put my mom through, and it was just different. It wasn't no arguments at home, it was more of hurt, that he had other women and stuff like that. And I think that kind of made me and just my older brother as well, like be more dedicated to maybe being, with one woman, and like being good to her, and trying to keep our family together. Um, of course, I went through my stages early on, but since then, I feel like once we started kind of like becoming more men, we
Mhm.
decided, I think all three of us naturally, because we're mama's boys, obviously, that we didn't like that part, of our upbringing and who he was. And he would always say, like, you can have as many women as you could afford. And I used to be like, Dad, I wouldn't, know what to do. I mean, I wouldn't, you know, like, but we challenged him later on, and that's something that we never could kind of get over.
Mhm.
Because he was a very strong-minded, strong opinionated person, and whenever he had a belief about something, he would actually just like, not go back and double down on it.
Mhm.
So again, that's, I think, who me and my brother are.
Yeah, yeah. If I could jump in, one of the contradictions, I think Saul Ayala, I noticed he was on earlier. When we worked undercover, we'd be doing negotiations with, a mafioso, a drug trafficker. And I remember we're talking about doing the deal the following day. And we used to hear the contradiction. Here are these guys selling heroin, coke, marijuana, whatever they're selling. And they would always say, hey, pues, well, hopefully, God willing, tomorrow everything will get done. The transaction. Ojalá con el favor de Dios, primeramente Dios, mañana se hace este jale. God willing, tomorrow we're going to do this drug deal where we're poisoning people. And So, we used to say the same thing, as part of our undercover persona to the traffickers. Oye, ojalá para mañana, primeramente Dios, se hace este jale. Oh, yeah, primeramente Dios. Obviously, God first.
Bobby,
So,
I think you bring up a great point, because it's part of the I guess the question that I actually, asked myself in my, journey and my path of walking with Christ, before I questioned that, because, I was one of those, my brother was one of
yes.
those that we'd prayed and been thankful, every time we, like if something bad happened, I was like, I was praying to God, and, I never, like, sometimes I would be like, wow, I'm a big hypocrite, here I am praying about something bad. How does that happen? But because I am a believer in Christ, I do believe that I had a purpose here, and that purpose was, from early on to where I am today. Um, that's the question I probably pose to, mentors and to people who are closer, or more in, have been on this journey longer than I have, because as Christians, right? Um, most of, the pillars of Christianity always had a past, similar to mine. And I'm not sure like where that like kind of lands, but I do know that, a lot of drug traffickers, especially the earlier ones, that I was involved with, they all pray to God
Right,
about
of
deliverance.
course.
They all, got on their knees, and it was a big contradiction for my father as well, and I think that that's the environment we grew up in, because in, my wife says all the time, it's like, I feel like she was the one that challenged me the most, because, of course, just in case you guys don't know, both me and my brother married daughters of law enforcement officers,
Yes, yes.
and she was raised in a loving home. She made some bad choices, but she always says like, I ain't made them, But at least I knew the difference between right and wrong, and you guys almost seem like it's like, just because you guys are, like helping people or doing whatever you guys are doing, like it's okay, but it's not okay. And I think that's going to be the, cognitive dissonance, right? Um, that we're stuck in between there for so long. Um, and my soul was my father, in many ways. I share this all the time, and as I sit here today, and we go back to, I'll get into some of these details, but my family, me and my brother's family, in total, we've have gone through every hardship, that comes with drug trafficking. The only thing that's missing for me and my brother is death, right? We've been through the kidnappings, we've been through, um, home evasions, and the attempted, murders on us, and our family, everything that's happened to our family. But we also seen the other side of it. What the drugs we actually bring, were bringing to a country actually could do. And my older brother died from a heroin overdose when I was 12. Um, you know, right when my family was deep into drug trafficking, and my father never blamed the drugs. He blamed my brother, for being weak and having that dependency. And in no way did that conversation ever come up. Like it wasn't something that that we actually talked about in going back to those times. I felt like it was just like alcohol, or or anything else. Like if you go to the store and you buy enough potato chips, you're gonna get fat, right? And you keep doing that, that's what you're gonna do. I mean, that was our belief, right? um and that's the way we saw it. So I, again, I think my brother and I, through our maturity and later on just probably through our intelligence, we got it early on that that was the wrong idea. So I don't make excuses. Like I know I'm sharing my story of my childhood, but in no way do I make excuses. Is that that's the reason why I entered, drug trafficking.
Okay.
So I have I have a quick question also, is that I was thinking about what you said on Dave's question regarding your dad's relationships with more than just your mother, and then how you felt bad for your mom because of that and how much hurt there was in the home. Had you ever looked about later on in life as you got older and matured that that was actually a life lesson your father taught you about how to treat a woman? I know it sounds kind of odd, but
No, absolutely.
the negative side.
I give him all the credit for making me, uh, for allowing me to see something I didn't like you know, and not wanting to become that. And I did I got 14-year prison sentence. I did 12, and that was my biggest, I think, teaching moment to all the younger uh, inmates there. All those younger kids that, not kids, but younger men that I mentored, was like the biggest problem is that we always complain about something we don't like, and many of us go do the same thing,
Right.
and it's like that's a hypocrite. And like, if you don't like something, if you go through pain, then to me it's always about not being that way. So if I don't like something, I'm gonna try to be different from. I'm gonna do my best to do the opposite. You know.
Okay.
So sometimes I do give really harsh examples, especially being there, but it's like I feel like, again, those were having I guess figures like my father, right? That in my life, it was always understanding what I'm taking in, that what I liked and what I disliked, or what I wanted to be like, what I didn't want to be like.
Right.
And basically is what you get with me and my brother. And it's gonna help us out, because in a way, I do believe that me and my brother were anything different from who we were as men, just as men, we would not made it to where we made it. I wouldn't be here if it was that I was too busy, probably chasing women, or or I like alcohol. Who knows what could have happened.
Right.
On that point, how did you and your brother get started? I've talked to you before about this. I found it fascinating when you went to me, told me the story of how you and your brother, I think, were working at McDonald's, and suddenly within a week, you guys are pretty much kingpins. If you want to hit on that, how did you and your brother get started?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to go a little faster on this. So once my father went on the run, my older brother, by then he was a big kingpin, and he was a high-ranking member of the Land Kings, and he basically took us, and became responsible for my brother and I, but in a different way. Since at the age of 12, he was basically like, "You guys are on your own. Here's some money." Gave us the specific rules: go to school, stay off the corner, um, and basically stay out the way. And in the neighborhood, in the little village, like me and my brother were like, we were Mondo's brothers everywhere we went. There was not a bunch of drug traffickers. There was my brother and everyone else. He was the one with the Benzes and Porsches and Cadillac. He's the one with his house, and he ran a drug trafficking organization. And unknowingly, um, probably not even thinking about it, me and my brother were his helpers. Uh, so we start learning, you know, the cocaine business, from him, and and the distribution side from him, since we were younger. Um, Literally at that time, where before social media, before phones and internet and all this stuff, um, it was all by word of mouth, and you would have so many, different cartel members at that time, which was big, was the Juarez cartel, which later would, kind of the Sinaloa cartel would take over. People would just knock on the door and offer him drugs, because he was like, we know where to find them. He's a high-ranking member of the Land Kings. Everyone knows him. Everyone likes him. So he would literally get, people knocking on the door, just offer him, dozens, or hundreds of kilos of cocaine.
Wow.
And him being, that person too, that he's a very nice person, and a lot of the people he dealt with at the time, especially with the, those drug trafficking organizations, you could imagine. We're talking about Mexican, silk wearing cowboys, gold chains, cokeheads, right? That did drugs, that drank, and he wasn't, that's not what he did. I mean, he probably did it in his earlier ages. So um he didn't like to get bothered, so he basically would put me and my brother at a young age to basically babysit them. We had a big house, and we had a 4-car garage with a basketball court and stuff. And he like set up like these like a fridge where he always had drinks in it, beer, waters, and chairs, just in case it rained or it was cold. He had heaters in this like in between both garage where we'll keep them company. So we get to hear all the stories, and be around all the people that he associated with. And that's gonna play a big part later on as well. Um but to get to it, is that him too, he was like teaching us, like he didn't want us to be gang members. He didn't want us to, kind of grow up to be like him. And always told us, go to school, and basically gave us everything we wanted. So even at an early age, we were like I guess like very fortunate because we didn't have to sell drugs to, get the, finer things in life. He gave us our first car at 13. Um, like like I remember having a cell phone, when there was still, the big old bricks, just because he wanted us to call, he wanted to call us and make sure that we could come home. Back in the day when, I remember the phone bill being like $1,500. At that time, it was like, what, and so we kind of grew up in a weird environment, but he also wanted to teach us how to be responsible. And so he basically wanted us to get a job, and to him it was like, you're gonna go get a job. You're not gonna be like one of these bums, and I'm gonna double your paycheck. And at that time, I think we would get like, anywhere from $80 to $125. So he'd give us an extra, double it up, or sometimes just give us extra more, just to say, hey, you're doing good by working there. And I remember saying, I told him I was embarrassed because the McDonald's was right, in the main strip in our neighborhood. It's basically where everyone, goes. And he's like, you drive to school. What are you embarrassed about? Like, who cares what these bums think? They're bums, like, don't worry about it. Same thing like my father. You're gonna go to work. And it was weird because it also taught me that, for my father, and especially for my brother, like, he would be around so many people, so many associates that I used to think that were cool, like high-ranking members of the gang, or I thought were like, oh, his friends. And then he could close the door and be like, this fucking idiot. Oh, I apologize.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I apologize, but I'm just quoting what he would say, and I would take this like, wow, hold on, isn't that it's supposed to be his friend? But that's gonna start teaching, me like the difference between, the people you associate with, do business with, and the people that could really be your friends.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we end up getting a job at McDonald's, and that's going to teach us a lot, that we're going to implement later on in our drug trafficking organization. But not long after that, my older brother ended up getting indicted, by the feds, and that left a big vacuum for us, at home. He was a provider, and we're just turning 17 at that time, where he kind of like, basically said, hey, you're on your own now. You guys gotta like figure it out. But what you're not gonna do, I remember him, me going to visit him in prison. You're not gonna sell drugs. Don't talk to no one. Don't do this. Don't do that. But I think it was a little bit too late. We had been around so many of his associates, and not long after that, one of his main sources of supply, who was part of the Sinaloa cartel, reached out to us and had a meeting, and we met him at the McDonald's we worked at, and he offered us, he actually asked us for help, to distribute some drugs, and me and my brother accepted. Basically, our first deal was made in that McDonald's, and I shared the story that was the same deal, that was the same McDonald's where my father made his last business transaction that got him arrested, and we started off in the same place. And our first deal was for 30 kilos of cocaine.
So when you started,
how old were you? I'm sorry about that.
Just 17.
Wow. So when you started, did you utilize your brother's connections within the Latin Kings?
So that's a good question. I feel like the gang culture started to change around that time.
Okay.
My brother, for the majority of his time, he would sell to to people in that organization and other Latin, right, associates, right, or gang members from other places. But the gang has rules where you couldn't sell crack. You couldn't sell any crack, heroin, PCP at that time. Those were the only drugs. That you could sell marijuana, and you could sell a powder cocaine.
Okay.
And he was considered like the re-rock king back in the day when they would take like cocaine and have to
yeah,
make it back into we lost Bobby.
He'll come back on right now.
We had to make it into we would help him making it back into a rock, so he could cut it. and it started to shift between dealing with mostly Mexican and Puerto Rican uh, associates to African American
Right.
customers, and with
Okay.
that came um, more profits. And he went from maybe selling 10, 20 kilos of coke um, to selling 200-300 kilos of coke a month,
Oh, wow.
and that basically was what was making him money, and us being around there, around him all the time. We're he's a friendly person, so everyone's like a really close friends to him. Like we were learning the business just like with my father. It's gonna come in handy later. Um, we're actually meeting people and being friendly with them again because we're twins and they knew us, and I knew who these individuals were. So uh, even after our first deal, he had there was one of his customers who was African American in the gang, and we knew him. He lived down the block. He owned a building, and after our first deal, we reached out to him and um, told him that we had drugs, and he came by and took the 30 kilos of coke that we had just received. And just to make it clear, even at that time, 30 kilos of coke was it's a large amount of drugs. For our first deal, we were 17, and I want to say that we knew exactly what to do, but we probably didn't know what we were doing because we gave it to his associate, and his associate never came back with the drugs. No, I'm kidding. He did come back. He came back. He came back. We sold him. No, we sold him the first day. We sold him the first day. We
I
sold him
think
basically in a couple hours. We sold it 30 kilos and basically never looked back. The next day we sold 50. We were basically selling 30, 50 kilos a day
Wow.
in our first month. But I want to tell you, in our first month we probably had sold over 300 kilos. So um
Jay,
yeah.
I remember talking to you. I think you told me, which was kind of like blew my mind, where you said it was taking you longer to count the money than to move the dope.
Yes, at that
That's how
time,
much. Yeah, at that time, yes.
we're talking about, street money, it's 5 1s and 10s, and we
Yeah.
didn't have money counters, so it would take a very long time to count the money. I remember, I guess my dad and teaching us hard work, because I remember those days where it was hard work. That was going to kind of start preparing us for what was going to come. But also at the same time, I believe that me and my brother, being so young, we got addicted to the life. There's two sides of the addiction, right? Um, where in one hand you have the users, and then the other side you have the like me and my brother were basically addicted to that life and addicted to the money that we're um, receiving from being drug traffickers.
Hey Jay, did your life change a lot after the first deal? I mean, you made probably close to $1 million with those keys and reselling them. And that month, you guys 100 kilos here and there. Did your life change, or did you guys maintain the same status, same car? Did you guys change at all?
Mm, not absolutely not. I think that you know what, we were young. We were always used to having nice things, but having our own money, it was a little bit different. Um, so we are probably spending the money as fast as we got it. We were spending it, and our life changed completely. We went from being dependent on my family to actually being on our own, and that type of money, of course, we were buying everything you could think of. Um, and it kind of being a benefit. It ended up being a benefit for the business because us being so young, and we started buying luxury cars and spending money at the mall, at other places where other drug traffickers actually would go to. We started meeting different people, which kind of increased our customer base. And yeah, our lifestyle changed dramatically. um Being 17 years old and be able to have 20-30 thousand dollars in your pocket, and to spend was a big life change for us.
Uh,
Hey Jay, we have a question for one of our listeners, and I know that it's going to take us off your story a little bit. but I guess he says much respect to you, Mr. Flores, Mr. Flowers. How closely did you work with JC Almanza from Wrong to Strong at that time? Did you know him?
Well, first, if Ron Strong is listening, big shots to him. Um, I, I didn't know him early on. I'm gonna come to know him later, but he was not. Um,
There
uh,
at the beginning.
yeah, he was not there. I can't. I met him, and I was aware of. We had different, not friends or associates, but
Mhm.
I didn't meet him till later on.
Okay.
One of Obviously you guys start making money working in drug investigations. One thing that obviously all of us that work drug investigations, the traffickers, the distributors out there that are really moving a lot of product. I'm sure one of your biggest nightmares, besides the cops, are rip crews. Rip crews, bajadores, we call them here in Arizona. I'm sure you start drawing attention of people that want what you want. Want that lifestyle that you have, because once you become the big dog out there, start moving a lot of product, you start not only getting a lot of attention from law enforcement, but obviously from the criminals out there that maybe are not moving dope, but are looking to rip dope, or just the kidnapping. I think I heard about the kidnapping where your brother was kidnapped by, I guess, a crooked cop.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Do you want to hit on that? Is this a
Yeah.
good segue to get into there,
Sure.
David?
Oh, I have no problem. Sure, but before we go on, I see that you I'm seeing the comment pop up. I just want to say
Sure.
give a shout out to Shy Ill. He has his own channel, Shy Ill Reacts. Say hello to him on. Um, so yes, with that comes uh all the problems you just mentioned. Law enforcement, you know, takers, right? Those people in the street that want what you have. We're walking billboards. And just to make it clear again, I did not. My brother and I were not part of any gang. And what's going to happen is that by then my brother was a high-ranking member of the Lion Kings, and um, some of those relationships, especially with the gang leaders that we grew up around our whole life, um, was going to help to a point. But as it started to shift, I wanted to, like, in a way, those people, the gang, and all those people that were around my brother's time became our enemies, because you know it's the culture right now. They don't understand that when people see us, and it's been our issue for many years, is that my brother and I don't look the part, right? We're not these hardened criminals with tattoos on us, and what they consider what's supposed to be look like, or they want us to be killers and gang members, and that's not what we were. So that's gonna uh it's gonna be a benefit for the business, but then it's gonna be an issue for the streets. But in reality, let's be honest, guys. You guys are in law enforcement. The hardest criminal, I've heard, uh, of, like, literally killers in the street be kidnapped and get taken for their stuff. So it's just
Yeah.
the way of the criminal world. But for sure, we had our share of so many issues with law enforcement, and I think that's what kind of propelled us to actually end up being successful later. And I think it's what gives me the ability to do what I'm doing today. Because if it wasn't for those issues we had with law enforcement, I probably would never um, like uh, we would not dedicate ourselves to avoid getting arrested. Um, and then there was the issues in the streets where there was plenty of problems, but one of them was that my people that we got went through home invasions and robberies. um and then my brother was kidnapped in 2003 by an associate that we knew. He was basically a kidnapper that basically worked with law enforcement. He was an informant for the Chicago Police Department. His name was Saul Rodriguez. And he basically would kidnap drug dealers for ransom. And I believe, he kidnapped, just in the case alone, I think he kidnapped over 44 people, including elderly and children. I think he was involved in over, I want to say more than 3 murders, maybe 6 in that case, and including my twin brothers kidnapping. And in total, he was involved in another kidnapping with one of our associates, and in total, he stole well over $8 million from us.
When you were young, you and your brother were young, was there anybody, any adults or any friends or anybody that kind of reached out, tried to steer you in another direction, or was that just the life that you
Um,
grew up with?
you know what? That's a great question. Like, there's, I always say that there's two sides where, because my brother and I came from a family of drug trafficking,
Right.
it's like many of the kids in the neighborhood weren't allowed to hang out with us, because everyone knew who our family was.
Yeah.
But we did make friends with older kids, always, our closest friends are 5, 6 years older than us. So imagine, me being 11, 12 years old, hanging around with, 18-year-old uh, adults. And I never felt like I was a kid around them, maybe because of our maturity or whatever. But there was positive influences. I think that the negative forces, for sure, um, are for the most part, when you're weak, are gonna like win over those positive forces.
Yeah.
And just as a matter of fact, I have a really good friend, amazing friend who's in law enforcement, and I actually, uh, by chance, I was able to introduce Dave to. He's an
Yes.
amazing person. He's a, a believer in Christ since day one. I mean, he was probably the first one who always would preach to me. Amazing person. But yeah, I think that I have my childhood friends that I grew up with, that not we're all involved in the life. And I say this to many people, like, a little village for sure has 150, 180,000, right, residents.
Right.
There's 8, 10,000, 15,000 gang members, that terrorize the neighborhood. But for the most part, everyone else is law abiding,
Right.
go to school, get education, get jobs, go to work every day. They love where, what the environment is, because it's like everything's there, especially with our culture. But for sure, everyone, goes there. They want a better life for their family. And um, just say that, 10%, 3% of, the people that we grew up with, took the wrong path. But everyone else did great. Um, and that's why I say it's like, I don't blame. I mean, it's hard because I don't blame my environment. I don't blame, where I grew up at. I don't, even the home I grew up in. I share this with everyone at my classes, that, my next door neighbor in that house where I was trafficking drugs, since I was a kid, she's the case agent in my case right now
Hmm.
for the DEA. Um, so it's just, it's not always the environment. It's not always, those situations. But, I was fortunate enough to actually be around some really great, people, some good people, and that I still know to this day.
Good. Good.
Yeah, but basically, we started off, at that age, and I want to tell you, it didn't take long for us to have the problems, but I guess we just continued to increase, our customer base in Chicago, and then we decided to, start branching out to different cities around Chicago, and like Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and St. Louis, and then, um, you know, sometimes learning the hard way, but by 2000, going into 2001, we were already pushing, 800 to 1200 kilos, and I think a month of cocaine. And I think by like, I always, to me, when the September 11th attacks happened, I think that, it had a profound change on all of us, right? In different ways. Even as drug traffickers, I think we all mourn, no matter what, Um, it's this weird way where it's like, me and my brother, like what we did for a living is different from who we are. And I believe that even today. But I know it's kind of hard because it's one of those, contradictions. Uh, but I think when, because the borders shut down, and I think that's a great glimpse of, when the United States wants to actually, make a difference, they can. Uh, right? The border's shutting down. I think everyone being in mourning, those, 2 3 weeks, afterwards, and um, it caused a significant drought of narcotics in the streets. And without planning it, me and my brother had did a favor for some individuals, and we ended up, having a large amount of drugs. Even though we were pushing, you know, um, that amount of drugs every month, sometimes we would, actually receive more drugs, right? Than we actually could handle or sell. And we were left with, a large amount of drugs that we were able to sell for a very, large profit. And we were the only ones that actually had the supply. So I feel like that kind of propelled us to actually being like, probably, um, the biggest drug traffickers in Chicago at that time, and
How
including.
much are we talking about? The quantity that you were talking about?
I want to tell you, I felt like, if I remember correctly, it was like over 1,200 kilos that we're actually holding on to.
Wow.
And the prices we get them, I think we were getting them, like, at that time at 16,500, 17, and then the number jumped up to like 24,000. Basically in a 2 3 week span. So we were able to make quite a profit there, and with that money that we had made from, um, from that drought, and money that we had been, saving, it allowed us to like actually be, more of a important buyers, right? Because now we had, we could buy 500 700 kilos, our own, without um, needing any credit. But in reality, what it helped us is actually buy time, because time is money. And you know for instance, as we increase and we're working with different drug trafficking organizations, because I work with the Gulf Cartel as well. um you know just say they would give me, 300 400 kilos, 500 kilos. I go, I wouldn't tell them I had the money, but I already had money in rotation where I could actually pay uh for majority of that load and get another load. And basically, that kind of propelled this, like, machine, I guess, of our network and distribution network, for sure.
Hey Jay, before Bobby's next question, real quick. Um, so you're 17, you're 21, 22 years old. You guys are rocking and rolling, moving all this dope. Your brother gets kidnapped by an informant that worked for the Chicago Police Department, and other things happen. Where is your dad in all this? Is he in Mexico? Is your mom in Mexico? Is your brother still in prison during this time? Your older brother?
Yes. My older brother, received 5 years. My father's on the run in Mexico with my mom. My mom will come back, you know, every now and then, spend time with us. But and in the meantime, well, when I started drug trafficking, um, we always go back to Mexico and visit. And early on, he started basically preparing us for what was good to come. Right, is to make those investments in Mexico, uh, to just in case, you never know. And of course, it's like, the reality is that it doesn't last long. Um, and then 2003, by then, my father actually was always like, um, introducing us to different people, different associates of his. And no, in 2000, like, early to late 2001, he introduced me to an associate that was gonna change our life in so many different ways. Uh, we were kind of used to like dealing with maybe two or three, four different, sources of supply just to fill our need. And I had started buying land and properties in Mexico. And on one of those visits, my father introduced me to a man named Guadalupe Ledesma, who was uh, he was from a couple of towns over, and older man, in his, late 60s at that time. Um, and I had met many people. Some of them were okay. Some of the times, some of the connects he'll give me were like, one time, like, deals and stuff like that. And at that time, maybe I was like riding on a high horse, because I was working with a drug trafficking organization that came from kind of the same person from Amado Carrillo, Lord of the Skies, and we were receiving, you know, probably 1,500 kilos a month, 1,800 kilos a month from uh, a man named Jose Tirso, who was actually who testified against Chapo as well. He was one of the Lord of the Skies, a lieutenant, and they had a route that was bring, you know, 7 to 10 tons of coke in the train from um, Juarez to Chicago. No, from Mexico City to Chicago, and then later on from El Paso to Chicago, and into New York. And my father introduced me to this man, and he basically tells me that he was Amado Carrillo's, compadre, and he would travel the world with him, and he started sharing stories, and for the most part, I believed him. He was some of the stories that he was sharing, he had like inside knowledge, and basically he said, you know what, I could actually provide you with large amounts of cocaine, and if you could move them. Later on, when we spoke, he basically said he didn't believe me. But at the time, I had one of my associates with me who was African American, one of my uh, good customers, had traveled on that business trip to buy this ranch I was buying. And he had his son, who was my age at the time, with him. And he told me that his son's like, I know it sounds like it's make believe, but I really believe him. So he showed up to Chicago a couple of months later and began supplying us with large amounts of drugs and cocaine. And basically, we kind of went from maybe moving 15 to 1,600 kilos a month to basically moving 2,500 to 2,800 kilos a month. This is before I set foot in Mexico.
And how old are you now?
At that time, I'm 20. I'm 21. 21, going to 22 years old. And I, right when I was like, I was 21. We it became normal for us. We could make anywhere from at that time without meeting anyone. Me and my brother's organization as a profit, I could make anywhere from $3 to $4 to $5 million a month.
But, I mean, if you think about it, you're 21 years old. Other than it being a criminal organization, you are running an international corporation at 21 years old.
Yeah, I maybe a national one. I hadn't got international yet. But
okay, well, but I mean, you've got contacts internationally, obviously.
Yes.
And we got kids 21 years old today. They can't get out of their parents' basements.
Yeah.
I'm not condoning what you did.
No.
But what is,
Yeah,
you had to drive to do something.
You know what? I just want to mention, I think because it's my calling today, I just want to mention, there's, you're looking back at the story, just there's so many, close to death experiences. But I want to say, at 2021, I don't want to compare myself to the kids that are doing nothing. I want to compare myself to some of the 20, 21-year-olds that are law enforcement officers. Those people who are in tech, those people who are making changes for the world, coming up with inventions, who have an Amazon store, who are, just, doing what they can, because in our life, and I'm sure you guys will agree with, in our culture, if it's even the negative culture, like you could almost become a man at 15, 14. Now, me growing up, I knew there were gang members that were treated like adults because of what they did when they were 13, 14, 15 years old. That never came home, they have life sentences. But on the other hand, I see all these inspiring stories of so many, young men out there that are doing the right thing, the positive thing. Way before me, I have some of the names written down, at that age, and I just want to point that out because
good.
I extremely feel like I was extremely favored in a way, or blessed that we made it that far. That we were doing that what we're doing, at that young age, in those environments, But I looking back, I just wouldn't want a younger person who's actually listening to this thinking, oh wow, that it sounds easy. But yeah, I think it was we're very unique in a way. And I see so many stories now of so many younger people actually doing amazing things at a young age, and I think that they have a better chance to maybe doing something, in a different world than in this world of drug trafficking.
Yeah, for longevity purposes, the other lifestyle is much more advantageous.
Absolutely.
But just the drive, I think. I mean, a personal drive that you had, and like I said, I'm not condoning what you did, but that drive itself is something else, because it sounds like it's taking you. That same drive is taking you to another direction to where you are today.
Yes, you know what? You're right about that, Doug. And I'll tell you again. I have a benefit. I have my best friend. We think, we look alike. We don't always think alike. But I think two brains always was better than one. Especially two big brains. But and so many things happen in that transition. I met my wife. My brother had met his wife. I knew her already, and she was somewhat in the life as well. That's how JC comes to play. And if he's tuning in, what's up to JC from Wrong to Strong? Dave, I'm sure you know.
Yes, brother in Christ.
Yeah,
Yes.
brother in Christ. Yeah, for sure. He's been so helpful to me as well. And I met my wife, who had kind of been through like so many different, of the hardships of this life in so many ways. She had been to prison. She lost her husband, to the streets, who was a friend of mine. And she basically challenged me, like, I think she's, the first one to basically say, like, what, you're better than that. Like, what are you doing here? Like, you don't belong here. Like, you're different from everyone else. And when I say that, it's because I was around a bunch of, grimy, people, right? People, that life, or that world. I mean, there's good people, but it's not, that's not what you're going to find first, right?
Right.
And I decided to move to Mexico because, she actually asked me to move, just because she felt like, she wanted to kind of start taking me, like, away from the life. And not long after that, I got indicted out of Milwaukee.
Hey, Jay, before Bobby starts asking you about Chapo and all the other major cartel guys that you worked with, we have a quick question. This guy right here, Saul Ayala, probably holds the record for undercover buys for the state of Arizona. He did hundreds of undercover buys. He's been on our show, Saul Ayala, also a brother in Christ, a great man. And he worked a lot of undercover. So I respect a lot his question. And this is a great question because he bought, like I said, kilos and kilos. He worked with Bobby. They were actually partners. Bobby recruited him. He says, would you have ever sold to a perfect stranger? Maybe someone who was introduced to you by an acquaintance. That's an undercover cop's question.
So, Saul Ayala, thank you so much for tuning in. This is one of the classes I feel like I want to, like, I want to actually have a class on this. From my perspective, especially when, undercovers, understanding, like, what drug traffickers, like, or higher level drug traffickers look for. I think I have a lot of, like, experience and knowledge with this, and I could really help out, but absolutely not. I was not, first of all, the biggest mistakes I see is that not understanding, the price market in a certain environment is important. For an experienced drug trafficker, you give them too cheap, you sell something too cheap, there's something wrong. Secondly, I'm going to only deal with someone who has, basically a background or some type of, where people know him, not just one person. He has to be known. If if one person is saying, I don't care who that person is this person is, a good person, I'm going to go back and, basically do my own credit report and find out where he's at, what he's doing. And for someone to be in that field, the way I looked at it in those, situations, like, you have to have, a trail, right, of where you came from, who you are. Someone has to know you. And so I know I wouldn't just, sell to anyone, who I didn't know just because someone introduced me to him.
That's why, I
basically.
guess, I'm going to jump in here. That's why a lot of times we would get the guy that was so far down the totem pole, he would get fronted some multi-kilos of product because he knew somebody a little further up than him. But when he would come out to do the deal with us, he would leave his family as collateral. So there were times we would take somebody down, and they're like, "Hey, I know you guys got me, but please, they got my wife and kids. I had to leave them for collateral." And we would have to go on a rescue mission to go rescue a family member or family members of one of these lower level guys who's probably going to make not very much money. He just used somebody up just enough of him that could get some product. But we're just talking 3, 4, 5 kilos of coke.
Yeah.
We're talking about.
I think that. Oh, collateral. I understand that, but it's really like so. Okay, maybe I seen a comment like maybe I was not. I think I was just experienced. Like the way I look at it is this way:
Yeah.
if I have to ask for you to leave collateral,
Yes.
I'm not doing it. If I have to, and I'm gonna say something like I will tell you, in the way we, people don't ever ask this question, but some of my customers I never met in person.
Right.
Oh, there you go.
Some
Yeah.
of my customers were like, "Oh, a good person, so and so's you're good, or so and so, whatever the case is, whatever." And depending on how they act on the phone, whatever the case is, and I used to tell them, "Look, I'm gonna send you, 30 kilos, 20 keys, like." If you're gonna steal, like you don't have to kill my guy. Like you can take him. Like I don't want nothing in return. If he says, "Yo, I have cash," I'm gonna stay away from him. I'm gonna stay away from him
Right.
because that's like a perfect environment for something to go wrong.
Right.
Real drug traffickers is like that experience is like in order for you to have cash, either you stole the bag or you made it. And if you made it, that's what we say. You made the bag, then that means that people know who you are.
Right.
In any city, pick up a phone, you go talk to a girl like, "Hey, Bobby from, Arizona, whatever." "Oh yeah, I know, he hangs around here." You're going to find out. It's easy. So,
Right.
so with that mentality, it's like, it's, experience and non-experience. I'm not saying that those tactics don't work. I do believe that I have tactics that could actually help.
Right.
I've met many, I've heard many stories. I read many paperwork where it was like I could see, even when it started, that it was already going to be, it was too, aggressive, too overzealous, like on trying to make something happen. And of course, it could happen to anyone, but mostly it's going to be those people who are, um, that are not well experienced, or probably like someone said, like thirsty, right, or like want to, make it happen.
Yeah, Chill Ill. He just said it. I think he hit the nail on the head.
Mhm.
They weren't thirsty. Thirsty dudes make that mistake. Yeah, you're absolutely Chill Ill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we jump to Mexico, one last question here in the States, because I read the story. And I think we talked about it. How much of a ransom did you have to pay for the release of your brother when he was kidnapped by that associate, that corrupt Chicago cop? How much of a ransom did you guys have to pay?
It came out to a total of over $2.5 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of backstory to that, and some of the stuff that happened in that situation is even going to be hard to believe. But yeah, it was over $2.5 million.
And I
Hey,
think
Jay,
I
we have
read. I
another.
was glad to read.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Go ahead.
Spencer.
I was going to say I was glad for the viewers that the crooked cop was arrested, and that was a good story. Because as we say as cops, nobody hates a crooked cop more than a good cop. We all pa fuera with them, man. That was I read that story. That was a great story.
Yeah.
So
You know what? Especially now that I'm working with law enforcement, I do believe, like, there's always it's not always like, not, I always say, well, not every drug trafficker is this, like, cartel, like killer, like, piece of crap. And I think it goes on the other side. You're gonna come across some of those law enforcement that maybe don't deserve to wear the badge. I saw a recent story right now with a officer up in California, right, who was involved with the Sinaloa cartel. And it's just one of those unfortunate things that happens. It's also why I think that's another thing that we talk about when it comes to a training law enforcement, especially correctional officers, right? That they might start off right, but so every so often you have to remind them, what crossing that line, actually means. And it it was unfortunate that happened. When law enforcement actually arrest or pulled my brother over and put him in handcuffs and then turned him over to a kidnapper. Like what he wasn't tried for none of those murders, which was kind of shocking, and
Yeah.
he ended up receiving just for the drug trafficking charge, not for the arrest or not for any of the violent crimes. He received, I think, right below 20-year sentence, and he only served 7. Um, so yeah, I think and I that's just one of our stories. I guess there's many of those as well. We're gonna kind of going back and forth with law enforcement. We've been around some of the most corrupted law enforcement officers for sure.
Hey, Jay, for training purposes, we have Grant asking a great question. Did anyone ever come at you by asking for how much drugs they could buy for a dollar amount? He said he saw a DEA agent testify that was his trademark tactic.
Uh,
Does that make sense?
I never heard of that, but then again, that just jumps out at me. Like, you're supposed to be in the market of trafficking drugs. I'm not a car salesman, but I go to a car dealership, like, what is this car worth? Turns out he's gonna be able to tell me, right? He's in the market of the business all the time. I'm not gonna like I don't understand that part.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't like that to me. It's like again, it's a case, and I'm sure it just with my background, like in my mind, I'm like that's ridiculous. Who does that? To me, it's as easy as like you know taking a walk. Like in the business, you have to know what you're in. You're buying by the pound. You're buying by the key. What drug are you buying? What's the market? What's it going for? How much value do you have? What's the turnaround rate? Like, I mean, just easy stuff.
Great. All right, we're going to move, jump over to Mexico. A lot of the guys want to know, eventually you met Chapo, any of the other big kingpins that you may have met. I read your story. I heard about your story. We talked about it. You eventually ended up in Mexico. Then your brother got kidnapped again.
Yes,
Uh,
my brother got kidnapped again by law enforcement in the orders of Chapo. That was probably
In Mexico?
in Mexico. By then, me and my brother going back to Mexico since our childhood, and we understood the way it worked. Being around my father, like it starts at with the traffic stop, cops, and kind of goes up, and uh, we had like we would pay the law enforcement officers in our town, just for security purposes, and like we didn't traffic drugs in Mexico at that time. We just lived there. Uh, we would pay them. They'll allow us to like basically carry our weapons. At that time, just like probably so many people in that area, and they kind of left us alone. But we're not like we're used to the corruption part, but not in this way. Where basically in with the social supply at the time, which was Guadalupe and Chapo's order, they sent federal police and they kidnapped my brother, and he was held for ransom for 22 days in Mexico.
How much did you pay on that one?
$10 million.
Wow.
Wow.
Um, it was it was a part of the business. It was like a dispute about a drug trade, drug debt. But with the story of my life is that my brother gets kidnapped, and here we are, in Mexico. First of all, thinking that that we're not in the United States, and and that our world was going to change, but not for good. Which I think that we're more worried about being adjusted, and then this happens, and I go from um, my brother being kidnapped, and me having that, all those friendships I made, all those associates I made in those years of being able to say that, my word was everything. I called in all those favors to, people that were working for the Sinaloa cartel that I had been associated with, and basically, I asked them for help, and every one of those persons I had a relationship with actually, put me in contact with, the next person, which was like, people that were actually, right underneath Chapo Guzman and Mayo Zambada and Sinaloa Cartel. And I basically arranged a meeting. And while my brother was kidnapped, they took me to go see Chapo. And in a simple way, I went to see Chapo because my brother was kidnapped, thinking I was gonna die, and I came back with one of the biggest, sources of supply in the world, as a partner. Um, so it's even when I say that today, like just to think about that, 99% of the people that get kidnapped, in those circumstances don't make it out alive, and that fact that I was actually able to, go up to the mountains and meet with him, and you know and not only arrange for my brother to uh, be released eventually, but to come back with that connection. I think that says a lot about our background and who we were at the time.
AJ, when you met Chapo, did you know at the time that he had orchestrated that for him? It sounds like it. I mean, I'm probably wrong on this, but he orchestrated so he could meet you. Now you have a bigger connection or another connection. Did you know at the time that he orchestrated it when your brother was kidnapped by that group that was
Well,
orchestrated? No.
well, when he orchestrated, it was to get paid for a debt, plain and
Okay.
simple. I had to kind of convince him, like, who to him, he didn't know who we were by name. He just knew who we were, like, on paper, if that made any sense.
Yeah.
I had my drug ledgers where I was able to show him that some of the, shipments of drugs that they were sending up were actually coming back, to me through different sources. And at that time, it was three sources, including Guadalupe Ledesma, another associate, Tomas Arevalo, and at that time was another one, was Noel Salguero, who was, head of the Matacetas fraction of the Sinaloa cartel. Um, and me having those ledgers, it was undeniable that I was the one making all those payments. So basically, he was just like, so it's basically you, like, you're moving all this drugs from us, and and so it wasn't orchestrated, like, to meet me. No, I think to him it was just another day of business and a bit different. But in the process of me actually, you know, meeting with people to rescue my brother, I was able to meet other drug lords. The first person I meet was Chapio Isidro Mesa Flores, right? Who is Chapo Isidro, who is basically one of the head of the Beltran cartels right now. At that time, he was the one actually. He was under Chapo at the time, and he was the one that was actually calling me. And then after that, I met Alfredo Beltran Leyva, which is one of the Beltran Leyva's brothers, who was actually in charge of the Plaza for Culiacan for the Beltran Leyva organization. And that's probably gonna be the beginning of my relationship with many of the biggest drug lords in the world, including Barbie. I never got to meet uh, Vicente Carrillo because by the time I was around, they were already at war. But Arturo Beltran Leyva, Rafael Beltran, and La Barbie were all associates that I um, people I associated with at the time.
When you met the Barbie, did you guys speak English? Because he was from Texas, a football player. I mean, he spoke perfect English, correct?
Yeah, we spoke not as much as you would think. When I first saw him, like, yeah, for sure, we were able to talk in English, but it was mostly Spanish. He used a lot of the Spanish slang and stuff. But yeah, these are like many people. I think are coming more to light as of recently, right? But America, I think the world always knows this is Chapo. But soon after that, I was basically once that meeting occurred, I was able to actually start associating. I met and I started becoming, associate of Mayo Zambada as well, which to me was like, one of the most important person. Like that, that boss, I think, played a bigger part in my success as well. Um, we basically, after they released my brother, we were actually, welcomed into a cartel and became important figures as distributors for the Sinaloa cartel as a whole.
We have a question from Big Joe. He asked earlier. So I guess, Big Joe, he answered your question. Mayo is not a myth. Mayo does exist. He met him. He asked that question earlier. I told him you were going to answer it, which you did. But now he's asking, did you ever meet El Mencho? And you mentioned how you met El Mencho, but that was before he took over the Cartel Nueva Generación Jalisco, correct? Can you tell us about that experience with Mencho?
Yes. Yes, I actually met in Metro. I knew in Metro. He was not someone that I actually liked to do business with, but I met him in the most unique circumstances. At the time, he was just a cell, like basically a a fraction of the Sinaloa cartel under the Millennium Cartel. And he was he was head of the plaza for the Puerto Vallarta Plaza, and he was in charge there.
Hmm.
And we were arrested by a corrupt government official in Puerto Vallarta, and under the orders of the Sinaloa cartel, they sent him to actually rescue us from the arrest. And he showed up with 80 or 100 armed men and took us away from the federal police, from the PST and the federal police at the time. And that was my first actual meeting with him. And yeah, my relationship kind of continued after that. Yeah, so I was able to meet him then when he was up and coming, and he was a violent man even back then.
Were you in custody when this meeting occurred? The meeting. Sean Penn, Kate del Castillo meet with Chapo Guzman. Do you know anything about that? Were you in custody? Did you know this meeting was taking place? Can you talk
No,
about that? If you
yeah,
know something about it?
I was in custody. I was in custody when this took place. This happened after his first arrest, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It happened after the first arrest. Yes.
Yeah, I was in custody. I mean, I found out about it just like everyone else, I guess, through the news. But
What did you think about it? What did you and your brother think about? I mean, Kate del Castillo, La Reina del Sur, the movie star, Sean Penn going over there, going to the ranches that you once visited. I'm sure they were different at the time. What was your opinion on that?
I guess I was shocked, just like everyone else was.
Everybody was, yeah.
Yeah.
I was shocked, and at first, I mean, I remember like, is he like trying to taunt the government? Like, I guess that was my first like thought. I mean, it's just weird. It just goes to show you, to me now, if you look at it, like when someone wants to leave a legacy, right? What they're open to. Like, here's probably the most wanted man on earth at the time, and it was more important to him to talk about his life story. So in a way, it's weird because like now I'm in a situation where people want to know about my life story, and I don't do like many interviews. But it's like for those people who love that are all about legacy and the life and who they are, that could be addicting. It's a great example of what was important to him at the time.
Mhm.
Is to do an interview about his life story in hopes that they did a movie about him. Like, I'm sure they could do many movies about him, but I guess it was, I was shocked just like everyone else.
Hey, brother, before we continue, we always do a quick break for word from our sponsor. And today, our sponsor is, like always, Jesus Christ. And this is my father's favorite scripture, Isaiah 40:31. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Isaiah 40:31.
Amen.
With that said, Bobby, go ahead, man. The word from our sponsor.
Where we're at now, what led you? How did you arrive where you realized that if you stayed in the game much longer, things were going to end wrong, really bad? What happened? What led to you finally reaching out? And as we like to say, as on the law enforcement side, when did you decide to join Team America and come over to our side?
Team America.
We'll call it Team America.
I have a story about that. I have a story about that, and John Humphrey, who just came in. I just saw him. I'm gonna say the day I feel like, and today I feel like I joined Team Jesus Christ, right?
Yes.
I think that
a real quick shout out to John Humphrey. David knows him. He was my first sergeant in 1981 when I was a snot-nosed rookie cop right out of the academy and a brother in Christ. Nice seeing you here, John. All right.
Man of God. Yes.
Yeah,
Man of God.
absolutely. He's inspiring. John Humphrey, amazing person. He has an amazing story for sure. Team Jesus, yeah, Wrong Too Strong, Chicago podcast. What's up,
Amen.
Omar, JC? Um, you know, all
So
right.
what happened? What was the transformation? What happened?
Information. I think that for the most part, it's like it didn't. It was just so many events and so many hardships and stuff that we had faced. Kind of just they were all stacking up on us. I was maturing. I was maturing at the same time. Um, my brother and I, us having children and especially me having a son and me being in those environments, like, I shared the story, like seeing my son. I remember uh, my son, he was like always wanted to be with me and it was hard because I was in those environments and sometimes it wasn't safe. And, I used to always be like, people be like, oh, you're a great father. And in my mind, I used to be like, what kind of a father am I? Look in the environment we're in. And one of the security that we used to have with us, I remember, being in one of the back of our houses and my son taking out, he liked playing with cars. And he took out his car and like wanted to play with, the security guard, and he pushed his car and, the security had his rifle, he put his rifle in the back and I'm like, what kind of, what am I showing my kids? And I would always pray and, I at that point, having all the money and status and all that, I really didn't care what, at the end of the day, I felt like me and my brother were just like, more simple men and we were into the party and stuff like that. And I prayed all the time, like, like what was going to be my life for our way out. And I shared this that, in early 2008, I had like a, spiritual epiphany, right? Where I was, sleeping and I woke up and I had this like, I don't want to say it was like I felt like it was like something just planted in my heart, in my mind, where it's like, I got it. I have to, I know, I had the answer, like how I was gonna change my life, and I was to like, I had this like thought in my head that the only way I was gonna be able to leave the life is that I left everything behind, and to come in and cooperate, and and it was hard for me to, because at first I thought it was just like maybe me just not thinking right, but it was something that I was like, it was like basically I felt like it was a calling, and I was able to share with my wife, and I said, I have this like this thought I woke up with, I don't think I don't believe it was a dream, but that says that I want to change my life, that I could cooperate and turn myself in, and that God was going to protect us. Um, and my wife was like, "That's what you have to do." And I was able to speak to my brother, and at first it wasn't something that he took like happily. It was something that he was mad about, but a week or so later, he basically just called me and said, what do we have to do? And my faith, I feel like for the most part I was taking so much like not understanding and maybe not wanting to make Christ like an excuse for my wrong, that I would not speak about it. And then a lot of me as well trying to take credit for it, for something I feel like I can't take the credit. I feel like it was in the Lord's plan for me to do this. And my brother and I feel like are very intelligent to a point where we always like thinking about outcomes. And I would I say this to everyone, I wasn't fearful when I was cooperating in Mexico, for 7 months. Me, I was understanding of fear, but I wasn't fearful to the point where I wasn't gonna do it. And I feel like that was like the Lord actually just shielded me from anything that was gonna maybe make me think twice, and for those months I stopped thinking about what, like, so many people around me. I was always thinking about them and thinking about like, what was it going to be like for them, and so many stuff that you get blind by. And I feel like for those initially I feel like the Lord was able to blind me from um, all those things that always took a hold of me, and kind of just guide me and protect us to actually be able to reach out to the government and offer our help to cooperate against the biggest drug lords in the world at the time. And we cooperated for 7 months, and when the day came, we they asked us to turn ourselves in. We did. Again, early on when we started, we never knew what was our life was going to become. We were going to make it, and I think my brother and I made it out alive for a reason. And I feel like we have a purpose, and that's why I'm just kind of sharing my testimony now with law enforcement. Not only that, with different people around the world.
So Jay, you cooperate with the government. You're making. We know we've read the transcripts. We've those that have read the transcripts. Chapo's making phone calls, etc. And it's deeper than that. I know we're not going to get into it. We don't have the time. It's usually a 1 hour show. We're already going to 2 hours, but I'm telling you, it's been like 5 minutes. It's so intriguing, so exciting, and so informative. And then we're going to go into the blessings right now. But before we get there, so now you're in Mexico. You're working for. You're giving this information. So now it's time to turn yourself in. You're coming to America. How much time did you get, and how was your time in prison?
Well, um, yes, I cooperated proactively in Mexico for 7 months, and I turned myself in November 30th, 2008. Um, in 2015 I received a 14-year sentence. My brother and I kept cooperating proactively with the government, and I always say this: like I cooperated so much with the government, I did it more than I actually trafficked drugs. Right, for 12 years, I sold. I felt like I sold drugs for 10, and I worked with law enforcement for 12. Um, Later on, my brother is going to testify at the trial against Chapo Guzman, as well as many high-ranking Sinaloa cartel members that we cooperate against and sign extraditions for. Um, and the prison part, my father would always tell me that in prison it was hard, and absolutely it was hard. There was those days where I think, especially from what my family was going through on the outside, I questioned what my decision. But ultimately, I feel like me putting more and more time into to the word and trying to like learn as much as I could about Christ. I felt like it kind of got me through um, those 12 years, and including that my wife, being a supporter, like always, staying by my side. I was able to still be part of my children's life. She came to visit mostly every weekend, so her dedication, her devotion to our family, and the decisions I actually made, and it helped out a lot for sure.
Jay, tell us about the man who witnessed to you and the man that brought you to Christ. And then you went on from started giving Bible studies. You talked about that, but can you talk about that man? How God used to plant the seed was planted way before, but how did your seed grow into the man of God that you are today?
I think we spoke about this, Dave, that for the most part, I felt like I always believed in God, right? I always had it
Yes.
in me. I just, weird contradiction, I was, first thing I would say, it's like, it's probably not gonna come off as that. I was fearful. I wouldn't cross a certain line. Like, I would say that me and my brother, you know, we're nonviolent, we, even in that criminal world, I think there's a right and wrong, way of how to do things. And for the most part, I feel like it was easy it's very easy to do wrong, right? We always fought to do the right thing in every circumstances. And I felt like, I believe in Christ, and having that time, I felt like I was, feeling a little bit lost. But I spoke to, there's this chaplain from Korea who actually came in and will have a Bible study, and I listened to his like story and what he had to go through just to be able to, be a believer in Christ. Really affected me. Like, here I am. I felt like, two different worlds, but I felt like being there, he really touched me in a way where he would be like, you know, The Lord wants you. He'll say it, like unknowingly, like He's calling you, and He picks you, and you could make the difference. And He would, just the way of He would, just speak. I felt like um He was speaking to just directly to me, and one of those instances where I used to feel like, at times, you're in prison and you see all these, Bible, what they call Bible thumpers, right? Where you see them doing, like reading the Bible and have all know the Bible back and forth in Spanish and Latin, and then you see them do other things, right? And I think that for most part, I think a lot of like Christians always be like, "Well, look at this Christian, look what he does," or anything like that. And that maybe could have been me. I'm not sure even then, but I remember being in a Bible study, and uh, uh, one of the most I guess believers in Christ that I thought it was there as an example, right? Got into an argument over a seat, and the chaplain was there, and he was like, brother, like, you're fake. He told them, and I had offered my seat, and he was like, "This is a real brother right here," you know, because I was like, "Come on, guys, like, calm it down." And just those words to me, I think, inspired me to be like, you know what, I could be a change. I could use, who I am to kind of inspire others, and maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. And it kind of led me on this path where I felt like I don't know every passage. I tell you, Dave. I told John Humphreys. I say this all the time. I don't know every passage. I just know the word. I understand it. I know. I feel like what I'm supposed to be doing at heart, and it's like how I'm supposed to live my life. I feel like the Bible is a great uh, a guide of how we're supposed to live, and I think that for the most part, many of us make the mistake of reading too much into something and letting the principles go, and with that, I feel like it opened basically open my heart and to kind of say, well, what's, I'm here for a purpose. Like, what's that purpose for me? And understanding some of the stories, I felt like, what? Maybe I'm supposed to do this. Maybe I'm supposed to share my suffering, like everyone else shares their, testimony with the world, and maybe, be able to bring other people closer to God, and maybe make a difference in law enforcement. And yeah, I feel like he fueled something in my heart, and now when I first started this, I was so like nervous, even working with law enforcement officers, and I've learned that when I'm able to basically share my walk, my journey in this new walk of with Christ, I feel like it's where I could be more relatable as well, so people could understand that. It's been difficult, going from that past life to kind of now trying to work with law enforcement officers, right? They see me and they still basically like, you're a drug trafficker. You're this person that was poisoning, our communities for so long. And I always, take a accountability for that. And I feel like, well, now it's, my path for redemption. I feel like Christ has given me, a mission, and he's calling me to actually do this, and I'm gonna like follow in that lead, and he's fueled me to continue on.
And with that, Jay, segue into before we get into Alfredo Montes, great question, and we're gonna I'm gonna show it right now. But before, Ceci Escano, when you got arrested, what was your dad still? Was your dad still in the run in Mexico? What did he think about you cooperating, and what happened to him because of your arrest? Do you mind? I know that's a very sensitive topic. You don't have to share it, but if you mind sharing it, it'd be
um
great.
sure. I think I said one of the things that he never wanted for his sons was, one of those things was us for us to be, rats, right? What he called it. He was disappointed. Um, for the most part, my brother and I basically lied to him. We didn't tell him we reached out to the government. We basically told him that they found us, and we basically begged them, and we asked him like like we never had a choice, and we're gonna do this, and he was extremely upset. Um, Beyond measure. And I think that, for my brother and I, once we made that decision, and even it's hard. I think this is going to be something that's going to be shocking to people, but when you leave a world of bad behind, sometimes it's even your family members. Here I was, a younger version where he always for the most part thought that I feel like the only time he really was proud of us is when we were in those times where he was able to meet Miles Zambada. And I remember me sharing with him that Chapo had actually called me and said that he wanted me to basically help basically mentor his kids, right, and teach them the drug trade. And I remember telling my father, like, like in Spanish, like, Dad, like, could you believe it? Chapo actually asking me to mentor his kids, because I always felt like my father always never gave us that respect, But that's the only time he was actually, I felt like he was like really proud of us. I do believe that he loved us unconditionally, as his children. But on the other side of it is like he owned, like, that was his life. The drug trade was his life. Like, that was our whole life. Like, my wife would always tell me, like, you guys sit in the dinner table and you guys talk about drug deals and profits and splits. Like, that's insane. And that was my life for the most part. I love my father, but it was the first time that I felt like, even for my own family, even for myself as a man, I had to actually like walk away from even your family, even your parents, because not all of us are fortunate to have these amazing loving parents. I think there's parents out there, you hear about these things often, that of kids, or of, I guess, individuals not being the perfect uh, parents or role models. And for the most part, I love my dad, but I had to walk away from him, and he was disappointed. Um, and that's gonna lead to probably like he made this. We asked him to please just do us a favor, and just we wanted him to pull him out. The government agreed to, like, basically uh get, I'm not sure say how to say this, but I guess get rid of his record, allow him to have a visa and come back to the United States. And when we turned ourselves in, we went to solitary confinement. We had very limited access to, like, talking to our family and stuff. The government will allow us to call our wives and stuff, but with so much going on, I don't, I think, I don't even recall, like, us being like worried about what my father was going through or not. But he ultimately made the decision that this life wasn't for him, and he wanted to return to Mexico. And people always ask that question about how my brother and I feel about him and what happened to him later. And I feel like it's one of those hard situations because as someone who I feel like, as a grown man now who has children, I feel like my father made the decision to choose that life over his children, over his over us, and that was more important to me. And here I am, basically preaching that life is not that life is not to be idolized or should be the subject of everything, and here my dad is actually showing us that. And for the most part, it's like one of those hard situations where it's like, as a son, I could never see myself doing that to my children, and but as an individual, as a, when it comes to being a man and understanding that he decided to make that decision, that he felt that he was more indebted, or more belonging more to that world, and felt responsible for us. Um and I have to respect that he made that decision.
Jay, one last question. Alfredo Montes says, "How are you doing financially?" We're not going to talk about that, but I'm glad you're safe with Christ. But one of the
Thank you.
things that you're doing now, that, man, it is amazing. You're now teaching police officers, FBI, DEA. You're training them on how to. You even testified in Congress, I believe,
Hmm.
on how to combat cartels. Can you share a little bit about that? That's part of your redemption.
Yes, I think in my following in my journey walk with Christ, as I'm growing closer to him, and we talk about it, Dave. I've talked to you, I talked to John Humphreys about it all the time, that every day I'm learning and I'm growing closer. I want to but at the same time, I found that through my knowledge and background, I feel like I could actually give back and be useful. So I'm actually, I have a class called From Kingpin to Educator, where I go around the country and I give these seminars to law enforcement, from state, local, and federal levels. Um, and where I basically share my knowledge. This class kind of covers every subject, but I do believe that I have, a couple, full like classes that I could actually that I'm gonna hopefully be working on. And what was important to me is that I'm totally against what's going on now on YouTube and all these stuff, where I feel like people with social media are promoting this life, this fake life of of suffering, and I'm hoping that to share my story, not just with law enforcement, but in general, that hopefully we'll be able to help someone in need, or someone who think that they have to take that path, and maybe they'll learn through our life suffering, what not to do. And on the law enforcement side, I feel like I have a lot to give. It hasn't been easy. It's been um, a struggle, basically, because I feel like um, it's still, law enforcement could actually push back because they don't understand. And a part of it is like they want to know about my background. And I always say, I was a drug trafficker. Like, like they're like, let me vet you. I'm like, I was a drug trafficker. Like, so it's still, it's been of a struggle, but I do believe that could be useful. I do believe I have a lot of knowledge to give, and I basically dedicate my life to doing this. And I have set big goals, and I feel like who I am as an individual. I feel like uh, I feel good about how I started and where I'm going.
Jay, this is my last question, and all three of us right now are going to ask you our last questions. But my last question is this, and I've been publicizing it, and that I was going to ask you, what similar traits do these high-level drug traffickers did they have to motivate people to kill for them, to die for them, to steal for them, to deal for them? And we'll start off with Mencho. We'll start off with Mencho. I mean, what personality traits did he have compared to the Beltran Leiva brothers, compared to El Barbie, compared to Amado Carrillo, compared to once again uh, Chapo Guzman? What personality traits did you see that they had to convince people to do things that they normally wouldn't do, kill and so forth? Can you share that with us?
Um, Off the top of my head, I feel like everyone you just mentioned, what they all have in common is their
Yes.
brutality, their viciousness. All of them have got to where they're at through violence, some more than others. But Mensch is a perfect example, even in my uh, time knowing him and being associated with him. He had a chip on his shoulder early on, and he was all about his way, and he was actually in the front line. You know, when they came to rescue me, he was there. He had his cuerno, wrapped around him. Um, and I think that with him, you could see, what his organization has kind of like how has it grown to. He wasn't considered the businessman. Those who know the cartel, like those Queenies, which were his brother-in-laws, were the major, like businessmen of that drug trafficking organization. But I feel like what they all have in common is just how vicious they could be, and how they use violence, as their main weapon of to get them power, right? And then once the power comes, for the most part, these lower level what you call cartel members, sicarios, whatever. They're just, it's like a gang, basically, in America, it's like, they'll rep a set or, a gang or organization. And in Mexico, they rep a person, which is kind of insane if you kind of think about it, and it's that hope, I guess, of being successful and coming from nothing and having money and having power that gives them, um, this what hope. I guess I feel like they see hope. All those younger, people who get involved in the drug trade see hope that they could become that person one day, and it only kind of leads into the cycle of more, of the worser, type of drug traffickers, from, the jump. I mean, if there is a measurable from, someone like, Chapo or Mayo to even Lacetas, right? Um, you know, and to him, I think that that's what they have in common is their brutality.
Thank you once again, brother. Doug, a last question.
Yeah, I'm going to. My question is that I know for me, it was very difficult for me during my career to talk to my boys about what their dad did. Because all the things that you see, and you've seen a lot of stuff also. Have you, and I don't know how old your children are. For me, my boys are grown. They have their own families. And I'm just now starting to talk to them about, what it is that their dad did for all those years and why I wasn't there for certain times and stuff. But how's that conversation for you with your children and your family? It's a little different. Obviously, it's a different situation and how you've redeemed yourself. And how are you handling that? And how's your family handling that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Doug. I'm always consider myself to be a family man first. If anything, I have 5 children, and for the most part, this is just like they were shielded from like my past life, but they also came to visit me in prison. And
Yeah.
they thought that I was in prison for making a financial, or financial reason. I made a mistake, and I had to actually tell them, and I has affected them because obviously they know what our background, my situation being that it's affected them tremendously.
Yeah.
Meaning my sins has now kind of I passed them off to them, and because of my witness situation, um, they had to like go through a lot. But I I would say early on I felt like my family has suffered so much, and I felt like okay, they don't they see dad, they see me as who I am, and that's good enough for me. I feel like I talk about redemption. If it was up to them, then like you don't have to do anything. Like your dad, and they love me unconditionally. They don't care about anything that has to do with my past. They probably don't rather just not even talk about it, hear it. And when I made the decision, I felt like I have so many reasons, but I feel like what, for so much suffering, I feel like sometimes as parents, I've carried my sins for my parents, right? As we just
Right.
talked, and we all carry those. Sometimes we carry our sins of our parents, and then our kids are gonna carry our sins, and it's like a part of them is like, well, okay, that's fine. My wife is incarcerated right now, and it's something that it's a continuous situation we have to live with, and trying to just undo those wrongs and some of those mistakes we made. But I think that it's kind of also what kind of propelled me to kind of come in on this journey is that my children are very different and raised very different from the way I was raised. I think people would be surprised, like very surprised. And now for me, it's like I want to be a representative that all their suffering, it was for the greater good. That one day when I'm done, that they could say, you know what, my dad started off doing so much wrong. We all suffered, but now I was a part of what, the good that he did. If
Right.
it's through law enforcement, if it's through some changes in the way it's combated or whatever, if it's, being able to change someone's life through my walk with Christ and, you know, however it is, I really hope that it's gonna be for them to see that, all their suffering, all those hardships that, basically I feel like I'm responsible for, that I put them through, was for that, for some good. If I just said, hey, I'm home, and let's just like live this life, and I don't think I would have been okay with myself, because they have suffered a lot in so many ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So in the part, but when it comes to our kids, me hearing you say that, even you being on the other side of law enforcement, and you don't want to share, the real world with them, I think that was my first like take. And the Lord does things for a reason.
Right.
I could go try to talk to my kids about some of this. They're like like they don't want to hear it. Like, Dad, like, don't talk to me about none of that. I don't get it. I don't understand. It doesn't matter. So that's who they are. So it's kind of ironic.
Yeah.
Great question, Doug. Outstanding.
That's a good question.
Bobby, last question. What do you have?
Just some closing thoughts. So much, just what a great show. One of the things I'm thinking of, obviously, regardless of the path you took originally to get where you're at now, and when I think of what you and your brother had to do when you decided to make that giant leap, I mean, obviously, you cooperated with us for 7 months. I was knowing that if you guys would have been discovered, you guys would have died a horrific death. And much respect for you guys to do that. But on our walk with our walk with Christ, the thing is this: it's not how we start, it's how we finish. And obviously, we're so imperfect as people, as men, as humans, that we're going to stumble along the way, and just keep getting up. And there's a finish line. And just want to thank you. This is it's been an honor having you here, and I am so glad you're at this point now. And I'm proud. I'm honored to call you my friend.
Yeah.
And
you know what? I'm honored just to be able to know you, and be able to conversate with you. I feel like, especially, I think this is a great testament of what the Lord could do, right?
Yeah.
You think about this. I was, on a friendly basis, and, with some of the biggest drug lord mass murderers in the world, who, basically respected my brother and me. And that was everything
right,
to me at one time, believe it or not. And understanding that part. And to me, um, like, I was in this darkness, and this means everything to me. For me to be able to have the ability to change my life only through Christ. I really believe that it's only through Christ that He gave me the courage and brought me to where I am today, and to be able to sit here with you, even being free and being alive, and then work with law enforcement and your guys' background. We were in the opposite sides for so many years, and that story alone, I feel like it's only through Christ. I feel honored that I have this opportunity, and I really believe that that the Lord actually is going to use me as an example to many others. That what, it's never too late. And I'm actually working on some prison visits now with inmates, and they're like, are you scared? No, I'm not scared. I walk with the Lord, right? The Lord's gonna protect me. But I think I'm a great testament that you could stop, you know, whatever your situation is. It doesn't have to be a drug trafficker. It could be any situation you're in, a bad marriage, a depression, something that's not, you know, uh, I guess making you whole. And you could say, you know what, I could sacrifice, but I could change. I could actually, put my life in the Lord's hands, and go through a little bit of suffering, but then come out and be able to say, hey, you know what? There is a second chance. There is, another day where I could, maybe confess my sins, and then wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm gonna be a better person than I was yesterday. In a weekly day or a daily basis, or in a yearly or lifetime basis, right? I'm 42. I feel like I have a long life ahead of me, and I hope that by the time the Lord calls me, um, I would be a great example of a more modern day, story of one of his examples of what he could do to somebody. how he could touch someone and change their life.
Jay, I know I said I had
Amen.
the last question. I don't have a question, but I have a comment, and then we're going to end it.
Yeah.
But you and I, we've talked about the story of Saul of Tarsus. Saul of Tarsus murdered Christians. That was his job, to kill Christians at the time. But God, in his everlasting grace and mercy, reached out and changed that man. And just like God changed Saul of Tarsus, he even changed his name, changed his name from Saul to Paul. And Paul was one of the greatest disciples, writers in the Word of God. I mean, a man of God. And
Um,
God has done that to you, has done that to me. Even though I was a cop, I was still a sinner. Doug was a sinner. All of us are sinners, Bobby. But it's because of the grace of God that
Dave,
we're at today, brother.
I'm
Do it.
grateful that you bring that up, and I feel like you brought it up at this last second for a reason. I that story is a great, he's probably the pillar, of Christianity, and just so add to it that most of his teaching and his spreading of the gospel was done in prisons.
Yes.
Um, he and when I look at that story, I read it and I take it in. I think about my life story, but and recently I'm going to share something with you all for the first time. I haven't shared it with many. That story because my brother's kidnapper name was Sal, right? S- and in my walk with Christ, I started to kind of like understand that sometimes I could be a hypocrite too of different peoples and different backgrounds. And as of recently, I actually reached out to him and sent him a letter from Christ, from the Lord, not from me, and basically said, I forgive you for I forgive you, for all those wrongs and that you did, and and it was a good feeling to be able to reach out. And the reason why is like I felt like he had a backstory, and come to find out that I was able to he actually reached out, and he's actually uh, a believer in Christ, and he's actually getting his PhD in biblical studies. And I was able to hear his story, and even from the worst I felt like um it kind of just goes to show that what the Lord could do. I felt like the Lord kept itching me and saying for me to reach out and just to say that wherever his situation was, is that he was forgiven, and that God was working in me, and hopefully he would work in him. And he was already a little bit more advanced as of recently. He's been incarcerated, but um I think that for example, there's many people like, what, there's different levels and he's evil, I'm saying, like, that's not for, me to decide that. And I do believe in Sal's story. The Paul's story, the apostle, and I think that, the Lord could change anyone and touch anyone's heart at any time, and, or save someone, who's going through hardship. Um,
Jay, once again, brother, thank you very much. I want to thank Steve Duncan for doing the introduction. Bobby's been talking a lot about you. He's talked to you before I met you. It was a blessing, brother, to have you with us. I'm not going to ask you to promise anything because, like my father says, never promise if you can't deliver promise the world if you can't deliver a pebble. But I am going to ask you, I think, on behalf of all three of us, the host of Ash Wednesday, that you come back and continue sharing your story, sharing your testimony, and we're gonna reach out to you to bring you back, brother. Once again, thank you very much. Our prayers are for you, your children, your wife,
yeah.
and may God continue
I,
using you, brother. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Listen, it's been a pleasure. I'm here at your calling. I really want to just add before I go. Not all of us are looking for the Lord, or maybe in that journey. But I will say is that there is some situations where, like, there's been people who go out their way, to do something, even the slightest, of good deeds, right? If it's of introduction, or if it's a call, Bobby, I appreciate, when I first started talking to Dave, he told me, you guys had spoke. If it's, John Humphrey introducing me to you, like those little details, if it's Steve Duncan, and the JC, the wrong, so all those little details that, next thing you know, you see the connection and networking. But it all starts that even for those people who are not as close to God, or not looking for, for him yet, or maybe not haven't gotten to that point, even start doing when you start doing something for the greater good, it does make a difference. And I see it. I could actually see it because, we from one day to another, I could actually see, what introduction is. You introduced me to some amazing people, Dave. I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. But just to some of the people that walked before me, and to say, wow, I'm walking the right path. That means a lot. So I just want to point out that for anyone who's listening, you know, sometimes doing the right thing or doing the nice thing, for someone else, or, could go a long way. And this is how it starts. It's about loving one another, and for, especially for those who believe in Christ, it's like being there, for others, and you never know what that could lead to. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank, you, Dave, Doug, Bobby, and Steve Duncan, for sure. John Humphreys, who's since day one, like that means a lot to me. Opening up doors for me. JC, who actually introduced me to John Humphreys. So all these little things matter. They keep building up. And I would love to actually come on your show again, and hopefully we could get into the word, and maybe we'll have a drink. I'll drink something other than NyQuil.
No, brother, you don't have to have a drink, man. Just we'll definitely have a fellowship, brother. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you
If there's
very
anything I could do, please feel free to reach out. It's been a pleasure, and God bless you all. For all the people tuning in, God bless you all, and thank you for the comments and support. And I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. God bless you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Wow, guys, what an interview, dude! 2 hours and 27 minutes and 44 seconds. We broke records today, and I mean, it's like 10 minutes. I mean, we could keep on and on, but we're bringing it back without a doubt. What did you guys think? Was it just me that? I mean, I'm just like, especially at the ending when we talked about the Lord, how God did a miracle. Man, what beautiful! What do you guys think? I mean, tell me, what do you guys feel?
I mean, it was. I mean, his whole story is heartfelt.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, he and I just I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, I can kind of imagine, but when he talked about the early parts of his life, where that was just life. I mean, that was his father providing for the family, and that's where he learned the trade. And obviously, Jay's very smart. He's a very smart guy, and his brother too. I mean, at that young age to take on that kind of a business, although it be illicit. I mean, dumb people can't do that, and that make the connections that he made. But that just goes to show that if he can make those connections, now the connections he's making now. And like he said, it could start with the one person, and then it goes to the next person. And next thing you know, he's on a program like this, and he opened his heart, and God entered his heart, and then it changed his path. And that was a hard decision, and you could tell he was struggling with that decision. And especially when he was talking to his brother. I was going to ask him that question, how that conversation went with his brother, but he just went with it. And I can just imagine identical twins. You guys have heard the stories on how close they are with everything. I mean, so they knew they were thinking about the same thing. I know for sure his brother was thinking the same thing, and all they needed was for them to get together to discuss how they were going to go forward with their lives. And it's just an amazing story to me, just amazing.
And you know what, Doug? I did talk to him about his conversation with his brother, but I'll let him tell the story. It was it's funny you say that. It was very interesting. One of the things that he didn't say, Ceci, is that his father was murdered in Mexico because of him and his brother turning themselves in. He was murdered by the cartels. He almost said it, but he started talking about his father being disappointed, but his father, may he rest in peace. Bobby, what did you think? Great analogy, Doug. Outstanding.
Yeah, it just, one of the things is that all of us, we're cops, and we have a lot of cops listening in, especially when you work gangs. We meet a lot of criminals out on the street, that when you see the young kids and you look at their parents and you look at the grandparents and you go, this poor kid doesn't stand a chance, because they have to try to break that cycle somewhere along the line. That if that cycle isn't broken, it's just going to be the next generation.
Right.
Hopefully, got to pray that by him breaking the cycle late, and his kids, I've talked to him about his kids, he loves his kids, and they're going to have a different life. And because I know when I was working gangs, I would look at some of these kids and go, man, that kid there was born, when they gave him a birth certificate, they gave him a DOC number, because he's going to end up in prison, because that's just the way it is. You guys know, we work some of these tough neighborhoods, and I'm just thankful that, that God reached out and touched him, and he was waiting. He was always there, but he finally felt him and felt God's presence, and the Lord took him in, and that's where we're at now. So great interview, man. I'm telling you, it was awesome.
Hey, it's funny, Doug, you said that. Chill Ill, I believe he knows them very well. He said they both caught colds this week, and they're miles apart, the twins. Literally, they both got colds this week, so you're absolutely right.
You hear those stories for these identical twins. It's like, they even ones that were separated at birth, always hear those stories, how they always knew and they always felt these things, and it's just amazing to me. So.
Right. Hey, guys, next week we have an outstanding show, and Doug, you're going to moderate it. It's your show next week. Tell us a little bit, and then we're going to end the show. It's been a long night, but tell us a little bit about what our show is going to be about next week. It's going to be an outstanding show. We've never talked about Captain Lord, but share with us what it's going to be so people can tune in next week.
Captain Lord, she was an innovator at San Diego PD. I mean, she was one of the female officers early on at the department that really made a name for themselves, and was kind of, if you want to call it breaking the glass ceiling, she was one of the gals that did it. I worked for her. She was our lieutenant in SED for a number of years, and she was actually a SWAT commander also, or XO. And she put herself through the SWAT Academy. At that time, there was no requirement that, the XOs or the commanding officers of the SWAT units went through the academy, but she went through the academy. We had some, I had some conversations with her about my career and what I needed to do and such. And she had some great advice. And in fact, my wife and I, we were decorating our home, and we had purchased some things from her. But ultimately, and I'm not sure, the whole backstory, but ultimately she ended up taking her life in a location where I met her to buy those items for her home from her. And it really kind of struck me, because I never saw it. I mean, not that I was that close with her where I would socialize outside of work, but I felt like I knew who she was at work, and so it really hit the department hard. She probably would have been the first female chief of police at San Diego PD if she had stayed there.
Without a doubt, yes.
And she was well respected. My first encounter with her was actually at the academy. She was a sergeant, and she taught one of her courses at the academy. I think it was traffic enforcement or something. But she was just a fantastic lady, and it's going to be a good show just to share, kind of her accomplishments and all that. But, she left a family behind, and it was just a difficult time at the PD because she was so well respected. So it's going to be an interesting show.
Bobby, we're going to talk about we're going to talk about PTSD. We're going to talk about the symptoms. But Doug, I'm really looking forward. It's going to be a great show. And guys, before we leave next week on the Gray Line, the story behind the blue line, it's Tuesday night at 6:00. Doug is going to be our guest once again. But next week, he's going to talk about the Hells Angel and the Mongols. And he's going to share an outstanding case that he did on the Hells Angels and Mongols in Riverside area. So tune in next week. With that said, guys, what an outstanding show, man. I'm looking forward to next week. It's going to be a great show. Tuesday night, 6:00, the Gray Line. Next Wednesday, PTSD and Captain Lord's Life. With that said, guys, God bless you. And we're looking forward to a great show. Have a good one, guys. We'll see you next week.
Good night, guys.
You